All right.
Are we live?
It looks like it's doing something a little bit different. It's kind of cool. Yeah. Let
Yeah.
me know if you see it.
Oh, hold on. Let me mute. All right. I muted the site. All right. I'm going to send this out.
Are you seeing us? Are we on?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. I like that you have a persona. She's like, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm rocking it now. I'm rocking
Yeah. 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 I got a Sasha Fierce. Like, no. It's been, I don't know. You know how it's like flu season or
it.
whatever? It's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like, I'm just like, you go through these times where maybe it's the end of the year and you're just
Mm-hmm.
like not sleeping well and
Oh
like
yeah.
you're just trying to get through. You just want to get to that
Oh yeah.
moment of like when all the pressure is just off of you.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I feel like it's that time of
Both of
year.
them at 5:30
Oh,
p.m.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Let me
totally
send
get
this out. We are live. We are live doing church.
it. Wow, it's been a minute, right? Oh, look, I was like, who is this? But I mean, it's been a while. This is kind of exciting. I think, I mean, what I like about how we've been doing this and the practice of what we've been doing is that we're continuing to do it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, a lot of times, I mean, just the way I've been experiencing things lately is about just, you just got to show up,
Yeah.
and the things that you do, the thing that's really going to work. And this is what I've learned, and this is how I'm still here. In the
Yeah.
words of Tupac, I'm still here. Um, I'm still
I've been
here.
learning. I've been like visiting all those stories too about
Hmm.
what Tupac was about. But anyways,
Hmm.
that's a tangent. Yeah,
That's very interesting. But I mean, yeah, it is a tangent, and that almost made me go on another tangent, but I'm not going to do it.
but go. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, but because I was like the Hilaire thing, I was like that was amazing. But I was like, wait a minute, you were studying, um, because I'm like, how would you even? But anyway, to keep it on track, I'm really excited about that because just like doing what you can do under demand, like if you just have to do it right now. 'Cause I think there's something powerful about identifying what you can do when if somebody shows up, puts a gun to your head, you can do it no matter what. And so far that's been doing church for us. We've been keeping it moving, and it's been pretty good. I think the church meeting before church actually helps too. The deacon
yeah,
board
yeah,
where we bring the deacons
yeah.
in.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's like I think it's hard to make sense of what is going on in the world sometimes, and
Mhm.
then it's just knowing that you can kind of connect, and have something
Mhm.
where we can go deep. Like
Mhm.
sermons are just designed to be like
Mhm.
introspective. It's designed to like speak to
Mhm.
um your like purpose and being, right? And
Yeah.
so just knowing that we have this time set aside to connect with each other, to share with others. It's also like seeing that you have hope, seeing that you're like thinking, what can we do next?
Mhm.
It gives me hope. And
Mhm.
then the hope is that all of us together could be giving each other hope.
Come
So
on.
the people out there watching, um, will be here. And, it's been up and down. Like there's just a lot of uncertainty.
Mhm.
And I'm just telling myself, it's like we're only here for a little while, for a blink
Mm.
of an eye,
Come
and I
on.
just want to do my best.
Yeah.
Some days you don't feel like it. Some days you're just like burdened. Some days you're sick. Some days you're feeling overwhelmed, and you just gotta like think. There's only so much time we got, and
Mm.
so let's just do the best with what we got. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. I have a whole like one day we'll go through my like my Jesus moment when I was
Mm.
little.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm excited to see. I mean, to be honest, like some of these the speaker today, you seem to know him, Sky. I actually
Heard
really
of
like
him.
Phil Vischer. Like I heard that
Oh yeah.
they used to work together.
I think it's
The
friends. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like that's encouraging too to see that there's these people who are like recontextualizing everything to
Hmm.
help bring us all along. So it's not just like it's not just like seeing where everything's diverging and feeling like you don't belong anywhere, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of people wrestling with it together. So I'm
Hmm.
excited and like I love new song and I love the community that they bring and
Yeah.
Dave and everything.
Oh, me too. And it's interesting because I feel like that's one community that I really feel like I'm a part of in a way. You
Mm.
know, I think it's intriguing. But what I love about doing church is that I think that anybody, regardless of what they believe, could pop into this because I think it's really good to just kind of sit and kind of watch content that has the purpose of like uplifting and giving you something to think about. And it was really exciting too. This is our first doing church post the elections. I hadn't thought about that. We haven't done this since then. I've seen you, but have I seen you 2 or 3 times since that? Twice, at least twice since the elections,
Ye-
or right before.
Yeah, kind of like yeah, like well, we definitely have seen each other because you've been like we're gonna so just so the audience, those of you watching right now know, Art's got his sermon series that he's been working on, so we're gonna have to check that out at
Yeah,
some
yeah.
point.
It'll be
Um,
intriguing, and then we'll bring T Dot back on or somebody to comment.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
well,
but
mine is going to give you a lot of because yours is really good where it's like it's really super chill, but mine is like, oh my god, did he say that? Because I said,
I can't even imagine. I feel like my stuff is like I'm just like, can I say this in church? Like,
oh man, I think mine's much worse. Like it was a few
oh my
things I was like,
god,
oh my god, this is online. I mean,
Lord
but we
help me.
rock and roll. But all right, so we're excited. This is Dave Brubaker here. We're in New Song in Santa Ana,
Wait,
California.
can you say a bit about Sky? Like, what you know
Sky.
about the speaker? Yeah.
I just know that I've met him in the past. He's super cool. His name is, I can't say it correctly, Jethani. He's an author. He's a pastor. I know that at one point he was with Christianity Today. He was an editor and executive there. But now he's a pastor and he's a podcaster as well. Um, He thinks really deeply, very deeply. What I remember about him is before people were thinking about postmodernism and like what Christianity will look like in the future. I feel like he was already sort of pioneering the way before people started creating popular platforms for it. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to hear what he has to say because I think it's a voice that's needed. And to be honest, I would have never looked up Sky to see what he's thinking. And another thing, if there's two people that said that pushed this sermon I haven't watched it yet, but Dave, and
Yeah.
Dave is so unimpressed with everything, So you know what I mean? Like Dave has seen everything. So if Dave is saying, "Hey, yo, you need to check this out," and I'm like, okay, and like okay, because I mean he has some, you know what I mean. And then the other person that texted this to me was Courtney. Courtney, she don't play either. So Courtney's like, oh my god, you
We
should
need to get
watch
her
this.
on. We need to get her on. She would be a great co-host.
Yeah, I think she'd be amazing, amazing. She'd be amazing. It'd be fun to mess with her because it depends on, this is the daddy. It'd be
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have to get her out, and even I know Nick and other folks too. But I think it's gonna be cool. So I'm excited about it. He's a really good thinker. He's an author, but you have to understand he's from these institutions that have evolved dramatically over the years. So it's gonna be interesting for me to kind of revisit and just hear what he's thinking, particularly at this moment, because I think and I think every generation feels this way, but I feel like we're living through something that's history, like which is every day is history that passes. But
Yeah.
I feel like these are things that will be written about. So it'll be interesting to hear what this award-winning author and pastor.
Sounds
Oh,
good.
oh, this is interesting. The name of his book. What if Jesus was serious about heaven? That's an interesting
That's
title.
deep.
Yeah, it's very deep. And I mean, that's a good question because sometimes it's like we kind of operate like we're trying to. Sometimes I think we live like we're trying to keep up a lie. But like if I gotta keep Christianity legit, then it don't need to be, you know what I mean? If
I
it's
mean,
you're fine on me, you know.
it keeps me going, you know? When you
Yeah.
think about it, it's like this life just isn't that long. We can't expect
Mhm.
it to be
Mhm.
tomorrow's not promised.
Mhm.
And so I just think about where are we storing our treasures,
Mhm.
Like and so it's hard. I would say the day-to-day is hard. Like it's hard
Mhm.
to not get intimidated by all the pressures and things.
Yep.
But yeah, where your treasures are, your heart will be also.
Yeah, there is a song that is old school hip hop, um, and and it's I think it's Grits, and they would say, and it's the lyric: "Set your mind at ease, won't you please? Set your mind at ease from the pressure." And every now and then, I'll just kind of just hum that to myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So my kids, and this is the music that I used to listen to growing up, is stuff that nobody ever listened to or ever will probably. And so, but it's weird how those kind of little mantras come back. And so, without further ado, it's exciting. We got Dave Brubaker on stage. He's going to probably do a little introduction of Sky, and I think we're probably midway into his introduction. So we apologize if it's a little rough transitioning in, but I'm really excited to get into this, and I might skip forward if Dave takes too long to get Sky up. All right, but I love you, Dave Brubaker, but we're looking forward to it.
And you can sign up for either one at newsong.com/events. And lastly, speaking of tables, there
Uh-oh.
you may have come in when you might have seen a table outside, treat every day like Christmas. This is the time where books. He's also the co-host of a podcast called The Holy Post, which is where I personally like to go when I need some perspective on current events.
Mm.
And true story, I told him about this morning. Wednesday after the election, my wife and I are sitting there in the morning with the coffee, and she says, I wonder if Sky has anything to say about this moment in our country. And we went and he did. He had a link. I actually shared this link around. I'm like, when you don't know really what's going on and you're wondering what to think post-election, I'm like, yo, go to Sky. And I'm so grateful he's a voice on the internet in that way, but he's also our friend in real life. He's going to continue our series called Visions and Dreams. Can you please
Yeah.
welcome Sky Titani right here? Let's go.
Woo. I think Phil Vischer is the VeggieTales guy is the
Yeah,
other
yeah,
person on that
I've
podcast.
known Brew for a while. You are the oldest teenager I know.
that's real.
His enthusiasm is infectious, and
Oh, that's
I
real.
love having that rub off on me. Thank you for that very, very kind introduction.
In some places, that's an insult, but I feel like that's really good. That's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. He totally is, yeah.
My hunch is that since the election, you all have a list of people you are trying to avoid, regardless of how you voted, right? We are living through very divided times in our country. It's dividing communities, it's dividing red states and blue states, it's dividing churches, unfortunately, it's dividing families. Thanksgiving is coming up. Again, there's that uncle you don't want to
You
talk
feel
to,
that way?
person
I
you hope.
felt like maybe not there's people I want to avoid, but there's I don't want to read stuff and I don't want to look at or listen to certain things. Um and I guess maybe there's more like conversations I want to avoid.
Mm.
Yeah. Did you
I
feel
don't
like that?
avoid them. Yeah, I don't
No.
avoid them, but that might be just, well, I'm trying to think. There's some that I don't look forward to because I'm thinking about Thanksgiving, but the majority of it is cool. But like my friends that think a little different, I actually invite that because it lets me know what's really going on. Like if I call, like I have a friend that is really, really, really strong in one direction politically, and when I called him, I called him the other night. I was on the way to go meet with somebody, and we talked for about like 45 minutes to an hour, and he was like, "Man, I love you, bro." At the end, it was like, he's like, "If you need anything, we're talking about getting together, getting the family together, and just having wine or something." And so, but I mean, we don't agree in politics at all. We're very, very, we have, I said we don't agree, but I feel like if I could get past the candidate stuff, we actually agree more than we disagree. But
Mhm.
it's when we're in the core of like this person's, this and that, it becomes problematic. So yeah, I don't run from it, and also too, it might be my personality too, because I'm like, oh, I wonder what everybody's thinking. Let me go, let me go figure
Yeah.
that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that was like a 30-minute response to that, but yeah.
No, it was perfect.
Here we go.
Hope doesn't show up. It didn't always used to be this way. Do you remember when elections didn't matter that much? When I was dating my wife when I was a college student, the question never occurred to me to ask her, who do you plan to vote for? And yet my kids, who are now college age, have to factor in politics to dating. Things have changed. There was a study that
Scott looked young to have some kids in college. I'm like, is he young looking, or am I getting old? So is he like, is he my peer? And I'm like, he don't look that old to have kids. And
I
most
don't
people,
know.
yeah.
was done in the 1960s by Gallup, where they asked Americans how they would feel if their adult child married somebody from the opposite political party. Back in the 1960s, the majority of Americans said they didn't care. They redid that study a couple of years ago and found it's now the opposite. The vast majority of us said we'd be devastated if our child married somebody from the other political party. What has happened? There's been tons written about what's happened, and I'm not a sociologist. I'm not going to unpack all that. But one thing that I am reading a lot about, there's been numerous articles and scholarly papers on, is what people are referring to as the empathy deficit. This idea that as we've become more politicized, as we've become more sordid, we tend to not show care or concern for people who don't share our politics. If you're a part of my group, you get empathy. But if you're part of the other team, well, you're just unworthy. You're probably evil, let's be honest. The empathy deficit, scholars are saying, is getting so severe that if we don't find a way of healing this gap in our concern for one another as Americans, it risks tearing our communities and even possibly our country apart. That sounds like hyperbole, but I don't think it is. So on one side, you've got scholars arguing we are simply not caring for each other the way we used to as a society. Interestingly, in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been another perspective that's coming from a certain segment of the American church, where Christian leaders have coined a new term, not the empathy deficit, but they now speak about the sin of empathy. There's a book coming out about this very soon. The argument is not that we Americans don't care enough about each other, they're actually arguing in the name of Christ that we care too much. That we are showing too much empathy to people who are suffering and struggling because of maybe their own decisions or things that historically we would have called sinful, and that we should not show care or concern for those people. Instead, what we need to do is preach the truth to them. And to show too much care and concern is actually sinful.
So that's just going to make Christianity really alienated, right? That's going to make it worse. So they're saying, don't be emotionally intelligent. Is that what I'm hearing? Is like have a low EQ? Is that what he's saying the book that book's going to be about?
It's a little unclear actually to me. Like what he's trying to say, that you don't want to care too much.
Yeah. Like the book that this other person is writing, not Sky, but somebody's writing a book that's coming out soon that's saying that the problem with Christianity is we have too much empathy. And
Yeah,
because of
that's
too much empathy, instead of telling people the truth, that we're not, we're feeling them and trying to connect with them versus telling them the truth.
I mean, that's not, I feel like, I mean, either is a really profound thing that's going on, or it's just, I just don't agree with that. I don't really know where it's going.
Yeah.
What do you feel?
Yeah, I just think that's an interesting book. I think it's the opposit of what he's about to talk about, it sounds like.
Okay.
So which is it? Are we suffering from a empathy deficit, as the scholars are saying, or a sinful form of empathy, as some Christian leaders are saying? So this is what I want to talk about this morning. In the wake of this election and these very divided times, how should we be thinking about empathy? concern for one another. To do that,
And I think I'm thinking about emotional intelligence versus empathy intelligence. But there's an empath sort of resource from IDEOS Institute that I think she did a lot. She's done a lot of research around empathy. Just something to kind of throw out there.
I want to look at a story, at least the beginning of a story from 2 Kings chapter 5. It's one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament, and I wish I could talk to you for 7 weeks about this story because there's so much to it. We're just going to cover the first 3 verses. It's the story of a man who has leprosy, who ultimately is miraculously healed, and his life is transformed by his encounter with the God of Israel. But it begins with just a few verses about identity. And from these few verses, I think we have a lesson to learn about the link between identity and empathy. It comes from 2 Kings chapter 5. I think it's on the screen if you have a copy of the scriptures. I'd encourage you to turn there. We're just going to look at the first few verses.
One of my cousins' name is Naaman. Just want to shout out to say, hey, what's up, Naaman?
Hey, Naaman.
Beginning in verse 1. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. We'll come back to the story, but to begin our discussion of empathy and identity, I want to talk about a study from the UK. Some years ago, researchers gathered a group of football fans, soccer fans. Any soccer fans? Okay. All right. They're all weird. And they gave them a survey. And the survey was carefully crafted, the questions were carefully crafted in order to highlight and accentuate the identity of Manchester United fans. Manchester United?
People love them.
In general, okay. So they highlight the Manchester United fans, which apparently is one of the best soccer clubs in the UK, or I don't know anything about it. But they emphasize that identity in the survey. And then they told the survey participants that there's a second part to the study that required them to go outside across the street to another building where they were going to watch a film about soccer, and then they would continue their research. What the research participants did not know was that while they were walking from one building to the other, the researchers had hired an actor to be a jogger who jogged past them and would fall and injure himself. Now, the interesting part is on some occasions, the jogger would wear a Manchester United shirt. Other times, the jogger would wear a Liverpool shirt. Apparently, Liverpool is a rival soccer club of Manchester United. And then sometimes the jogger would just wear a plain t-shirt. So guess what happened? When the Manchester United fans were crossing the street and the jogger who fell and injured himself wore a Manchester United shirt, the fans stopped and helped him 92% of the time. When he was wearing a Liverpool shirt, however, they only stopped and helped him, let me get this straight, 30% of the time. Why? What the researchers concluded was that there is a link between identity and empathy. When you see the person in need as sharing your identity, that person belongs to the same group that you belong to, your identity expands. It incorporates them, and so you stop and you help. But when you see your identity as completely separate from the identity of the person in need, in this case, Liverpool fan and Manchester United fan, well, they're unworthy of your care and your dignity because they don't share your identity. This is the problem with what's happening in America. Our empathy deficit is not really a cause, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of the fact that we don't share an identity with many of the people around us, and therefore we conclude they are not worthy of our care. This brings me back to 2 Kings 5. In these two opening verses, we are introduced to two characters that appear to have no shared identity. First, we're introduced to Naaman. Naaman is identified as a great man, a general overseeing the armies of Aram. Aram is sometimes translated in your Bibles as Syria, an adjacent country to Israel and Israel's enemy and rival. Naaman is the general commander. He's highly regarded by his king. He's basically the second in command of the country. You can't get any higher without being the king. He's at the very top of the top. Mighty, powerful, a soldier, a commander, very top of society. And then we're introduced to his polar opposite. A young person at the very bottom of society. She has three strikes against her. First, she's young in a society that values the old. Secondly, she's a girl in a patriarchal society where women and girls had no rights or power whatsoever. And third, perhaps most importantly, she was an Israelite and she was a slave. She was a foreigner with no rights, no independence, no power. Naaman, the great man at the top, and this girl, slave at the bottom, who is so insignificant, her name is never even included in the story. You can't get more gap in identity than these two people. And so there appears to be no bridge between Naaman and this young girl where empathy can be extended. He's a Manchester fan, she's Liverpool. This is what's going on in our society. There are a multitude of voices, powers, instruments that are trying to convince us that we possess only one identity. You are one thing. You are a Republican, or you are a Democrat. You are a Christian, or you're a non-Christian. You are a citizen or you are an immigrant. You are documented or you are undocumented. You are a man or you are a woman. You are Gen Z or you're a boomer. You are one thing. And if another person does not share that one identity, well, then they're not worthy of your care or concern. In fact, they may well be your enemy. We've seen this expand into more and more things where your single identity becomes the receptacle through which you see everything. You're MAGA or you're woke. You're a vaxxer or an anti-vaxxer. You're Android or iPhone. You judge the person. You know when you get that text message and it's green, you have a bit of judgment. Don't you? Mm-hmm. And so when that other person doesn't share your identity and they're struggling or they're suffering, our inclination is not to reach out and help or care or show concern or empathize. No. We think, no, that person just needs to be told how they're wrong. They need the truth. That's where we come into the empathy is a sin camp. And go, well, the reason you're struggling, the reason you're suffering, the reason you're in that condition is because you're just wrong. And if you saw things the way I see them, then you get your life together. And my job is to just preach to you and tell you how to clean up your act. This is the problem of a simple, narrow identity. There was a fascinating TED Talk I came across a few years ago by a Nigerian novelist named Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Good job. That brother's pronounced that name well. Come on.
You know he practiced that one though.
He had to. Come on. I mean, it was like he was speaking in tongues or something. It was amazing.
And in her TED Talk, she talks about this as the problem of the single story. When you believe that another person just has one single story, it cuts off any possibility of connection. And she gives the example of when she first came to the United States as a college student from Nigeria. This is what she said. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language.
Mm.
She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was
No.
consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey.
I love
Turns
that.
out Adichie had grown up on a college campus. Her parents were very well-educated professors. She was highly educated, very cosmopolitan. But none of those identities were things that her American college roommate believed could be true of a Nigerian. She goes on to say, her roommate felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. This is the problem of single identity or single story. If you are just one thing, and you see everyone else as just one thing, and those one things aren't the same, you cut off the possibility of connection. And with it, the possibility of care and empathy. So much of our media, social media, cable news, our political leaders are trying to convince us we are just one thing. And they.
He's hitting on it. This is important. I mean, because this is deep. It's actually pretty deep. I think it's a problem even in culture and even when it comes to vocation, right? You're talking to people and they're like, what category do I put you in? You know? Like I saw AOC, did you see this AOC when she reached out to her supporters? So I'm sure there's other situations like this, but she reached out and she asked her people that voted for her that some of the same people that voted for AOC voted for Trump, and she was like, "Why? Why?" But it wasn't like she wasn't angry. So there's an empathy, which is kind of intriguing. It was very smart, and she was like, "Why? Why would you vote for me and Trump in my district?" And the consensus was that they felt that Trump was for them and she was for them. And that's so natural. But I mean, so the phenomenon he's talking about is there seems to be. That's why I think a lot of people are surprised by a lot of these results. But it seems to be that this phenomenon it exists, but we're not. Somehow it's. I think that it might be. I don't know if it's always existed, but it's kind of cool to hear him sort of break it down. It's pretty cool. Are you tracking with that at all? What do you think?
Kind of your first response about how, like, when it's like, are there people you don't want to talk to? And it's like, for me, it's like, you're like, oh, I just want to hear what people have to say. And I'm just like, because I guess I'm more of an introvert. I'm like, I kind of just, in general, just don't really want to talk to people about stuff where it's like if you can't really move in a direction together, it's hard to like even want to talk to anyone. And so it's interesting because the church that Sky is speaking at right now is their tagline is Home of the Misfits. And I feel like as a misfit, and I see you, like, just knowing your story, like you've kind of been that person that like maybe didn't quite fit in, and then you had to just be that everywhere.
Right.
Where it's like like my thing is like we talked about this. My thing is like all about intellectual generosity. It's all about understanding people. Like when I spoke at New Song, I think one of the first times one of my like one-liners was, it's hard to love what you don't understand. It's like you can say you love everything, but it's easier to love the things you do understand than to love the things you don't understand.
Yeah.
So I do feel like I get what he's saying. Yeah, and just like I'm thinking like who are these people? And I do think like because we're so like that separation is real, But then I think you and I and a bunch of others in the communities that we've run with are kind of used to being that person that's like going in between groups.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my like my
yeah.
my takeaway is kind of like I'm with him, and like I feel like we're kind of like in this other category, as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because in between other groups, that's my whole life, every day.
Yeah.
Um, and I agree with that. I think the reason I think this is cool, I'm excited to see what he says next, is because for me, it almost feels like a secret. Like
Oh,
when I'm in different rooms, it's like it's a
yeah.
secret that I know that these groups, the people are generally wanting and desiring similar things, but
hmm
they identified in these groups that separate them.
Yeah. You ever
And I
watch
think,
Black Jeopardy?
huh? Black
You ever
Jeopardy?
watch Black Jeopardy
Oh, I have not.
on SNL? It's usually like it's like
Well, what is? I think I have seen that. I don't remember
it's
the
like
actual.
it's like it's like there's three contestants on Jeopardy. Two of
Mm-hmm,
them are black, and then there's like usually a white person.
mm-hmm.
And then they're just like kind of making fun of like
Got it.
how culturally they interpret these
Yeah.
things. And
I
then at some point at the end, it's always like, oh my gosh, we actually agree. We actually feel the same about stuff.
I think that's true. And the other thing is, and then we'll pop back to him. I think it in most conversations I'm having, particularly when it's communicating with large groups or even trying to tell a story, um, people are understanding in within their identities. There's all these lanes, and so if you don't recognize that, you come out with a different understanding than you do when you're realizing that, oh, this person is speaking from this perspective, this person speaking from that perspective. But the only way for me to really understand that's happening is because I'm recognizing that there's other perspectives and other sort of people identifying certain ways and looking for those cues, listening to how they're speaking to those cues and trying to decode those messages in a way that allow us to talk. So I think it's somewhat of a complex thing that I feel like he's making simple. So it's kind of cool to me, just sort of ripping there. But I do. We're gonna have to watch Black Jeopardy next because I feel like
Whoever they are just one thing.
Mm,
And rather than building bridges of connection and empathy, they try to separate us with anger
hmm,
and fear. Let's go back to 2 Kings 5. There are two important details about Naaman and this young enslaved girl that we need to look at. First, we're told that Naaman had leprosy. Now, the translation's not entirely clear here from Hebrew. We don't know for sure it was leprosy, but it was some kind of debilitating skin disease that Naaman had. It caused him great pain, both probably physically and socially. It was a visible ailment that others would have been repulsed by. And the other important detail is about the Israelite girl. Going back to verse 2, now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. This Israelite girl wasn't just enslaved, she was kidnapped. She was stolen from her family, from her home, from her country, and trafficked back to Aram, to Syria. And here's the detail that you may not have picked up on. Naaman is the commander of Aram's armies that was very successful in raiding cities in Israel. Naaman very likely led the raid in which this girl was captured. And they plundered whatever villages or cities they raided, brought back their goods, their animals, their flocks, their silver, their gold, and even their children. And then Naaman chose this girl to work in his home and serve his wife. Not only was Naaman a great man at the top of society and this girl at the very bottom, not only did they not have anything in common between their identities, but to add even more distance between them. This girl was a victim, and Naaman was the villain. These are the last two people on earth you think would build a connection of empathy. She had every reason to hate him, to resent him, to see herself as a victim and nothing more. But look at verse 3. She, the enslaved Israelite girl, said to her mistress, Naaman's wife, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." This young girl, this victim, no power, no wealth, no status, who had been kidnapped and enslaved, the lowest of the low, somehow looks at her captor, this powerful man at the other end of the spectrum, and she has empathy for him and offers him a means of healing. How? How is that possible? Why would she do that? Let's go back to the UK, to those soccer fans.
What are you thinking, Cheryl?
Couple things. I mean, I think the one thing is I'm thinking about I heard once something, I think it was from Nona Jones. I don't know if you've seen her. She's like
Oh, I like her.
she's got these amazing
Yeah.
she's got these amazing quotes. I'm always like, wow, that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
But she was talking about Sarah and Hagar. And for those of the people who don't know, I mean, it's a pretty common story, but Sarah was Abraham's wife. Correct me if I'm wrong too, because sometimes I get a little rusty. But Sarah couldn't have children, but Abraham was promised, he'd be father of a nation, right? But then Sarah's not able to have children, so then she's like, oh, Hagar will be my kind of a surrogate sort of thing. Hagar will have the child on my behalf. And the way that Nona described it was they basically probably wasn't consensual, so she was probably SA'd. These people it's not like this person wanted to get married, right? And so here's the servant who just gets just kind of gets inserted into the story of people with power. And I think of the things that we've been talking about, that Sky's been talking about, I think the thing that really stands out to me is this sense of power and what it is and what it means and what it has, what it can do. How it's there's kind of a Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, but it also feels like there's no accountability for that. And so what are they going to do with it? And I think that's kind of what's on my mind. But yeah, just I would say also the story, the specific story that he's talking about from Kings, this idea of loving those who hate you or loving your enemy, I think that's really powerful too, right? So yeah, it's hard because you're these people have power, they have everything, do they need more? And that's pretty, that's something that's been on my mind for sure.
Wow. I
How
think
you
that's
feel?
well. There's a lot of things that I kind of sort of get from this a little bit, to be honest. I was there's two things. I think a lot of social innovation comes when you have this sort of ability to have empathy for someone when you are maybe just it's not convenient. And so there's the two things that come to mind. Viktor Frankl's search for meaning, sort of how he even being in a concentration camp got all these epiphanies. I think that sort of parallels to a lot of this empathy quotient, empathy sort of things we're talking about. Another thing is I have a friend, Alpha. She runs an organization called Rising Tide Capital, and Alpha had a similar situation where she was kidnapped as a kid and she had the chance to kill her captives, but then she found empathy in a very spiritual experience. And I don't think that this organization that she's been running for over a decade would be as effective if she didn't have that deep empathy. So I think just when I hear him talk about that, and I know he's about to go into the Manchester piece, um, I think one of the things that we do when we start to see people beyond that individual space is I think it's interesting because we're kind of opened up to new possibilities, sort of
Yeah.
but it does require a certain level of character because I mean with the Hagar situation you're just describing, it's like, oh my gosh, like how do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, one there's a funny story. We were having a retreat once, and we had Dr. Heidi Baker,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and we were all complaining about our work and stuff. Like, oh
Hmm.
man, it's so hard to, be a person of faith, and then there's all the, all that worldliness happening around you, and you got to be both. And then she's like, yeah, I mean, it is hard. I mean, but for her, she's like in the war zones, and she's just like, I just
Hmm.
saw like children get massacred,
Hmm.
like people's kids, and like, and her story is incredible because she's like, and then I realized it was just kids shooting kids, and she forgave. She's like, I had to forgive those those that performed the aggressions,
Hmm.
and she said that as a result she's seen like what how powerful that is,
Hmm.
how
Yeah.
that changes lives. But it's funny, the funny part is that like here we are, like say, man, corporate life can be really tough,
Hmm.
and then it's like then there's these people that are just out there and it's just like
Yeah.
life or death.
Yeah. It's perspective, right? I love it. That's really good. Let's see where he goes with Manchester, going back to Manchester.
Yeah.
Those researchers did another round of the same experiment with a slight change. They again gathered some soccer fans and they had them take a survey. But the survey, if you remember the first time, had been composed to really emphasize the Manchester United fan's identity as a Manchester United fan. This time they recomposed the questions of the survey to instead really emphasize their love of soccer overall.
Mm.
Not any particular soccer club, but soccer the game.
This is good.
So the people left the survey with that on the front of their mind, that I'm a soccer fan and the game itself is great. And then everything unfolded the exact same way. Again, there was an actor who pretended to be a jogger who would run past them individually and then would fall and injure himself, sometimes wearing a Manchester United jersey, sometimes wearing a Liverpool jersey, sometimes wearing a plain shirt. They redid the exact same experiment, but the outcome was dramatically different. This time, it didn't matter whether the jogger was wearing a Manchester shirt or a Liverpool shirt. In both cases, as long as he was wearing a soccer jersey, they stopped and helped him 80% of the time.
Wow.
But when he just wore a plain t-shirt, they only helped him 22% of the time. What changed? When they looked at the guy wearing even the Liverpool shirt, they didn't see someone that was different from them because their identity, their self-conception was not that they were primarily a Manchester fan, but that they were a soccer fan. That's an identity that was large enough to include even a Liverpool guy. So they didn't just see someone from the rival soccer club, they saw someone who's a soccer fan like me. Their sense of their own identity had expanded, and with that expanded sense of their identity, their empathy grew to include more people. It didn't grow wide enough to include non-soccer fans, but it did grow wider to include a Liverpool fan.
I feel this way every time the Cowboys lose, the Dallas Cowboys.
Mhm.
I'm like I just feel like I'm looking for looking for empathy in a way that could change something, to change things in a bigger way. So it's really fascinating.
That's funny. I
Yeah.
mean, I was from Eagles territory,
Hmm.
Philadelphia, and
Oh yeah. Oh man. So we were like rivals.
then I remember hearing all the smack talk.
Oh man. So like and what's interesting too about what he said is it is I forget that sports um does that. So I'm wearing this Mavs hat and I had this Mavs hat on yesterday when I was coming out of the Bay. And ironic, I didn't realize that the Mavs had just played the Warriors. And they're like, "Man, I'm so sorry. What happened?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" But it was like these instant bonds with people because they were like, "Oh man, Golden Gate's struggling at times, but so I'm sorry, but we got Steph. What are you gonna do?" So it was intriguing, like, and this is like I had a call like this. It instantly happened, but I didn't even know they were playing. Like my
That's so
parking lot
funny.
now it's packed out, actually, because the Cowboy Stadium is real close to where the office is, and
Hmm.
so if we don't wrap up doing church like at a certain time, I'm gonna
You'll
be
be
stuck in
stuck.
traffic.
Oh no. Um, let me tell a woman's version of it. I know this is a little relevant because you should share some of the work you're doing, but like
Mhm.
there's this thing where if you go up to like any woman, like it got to be of a certain age, but like and you just ask her for a tampon,
Oh,
and like she just got you. She's like, I know what it's like, you know, I know the feeling, and she just gets you.
um,
She's like, I got you. And this is like, it's just always it's this interesting thing where it's like, you could just kind of go up to any woman, and if they could do something about it, they do something about it.
I get that. That's kind of cool. I was like, I wonder if I walked up to her and asked her, like, well, hey, no, I wouldn't do that. There's some things I like to joke with. I'm like, that'd be too awkward for me, for them. No, but that's really cool. Yeah, I've seen that actually. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, my daughters. Yeah, I see that often actually. The other thing that happens is when they send me to go buy the stuff. I'm like, oh man, like, you know what I'm saying?
And then you're like, you're looking at
Yeah,
the shelf. You're
yeah, yeah.
like,
Like when I first had to do it, it was like it freaked me out the first time I ever had to do it. But then you get there and there's other guys shopping doing the same thing, and then we bond on that actually.
oh
Yeah,
wow,
yeah, because it's
I did
like,
not
oh man,
expect.
I'm here. Because there's been a few
I did,
times where I've had a conversation with a guy that's doing the same thing, and I'm like, I don't know what they didn't. I look at these directions, and I don't really know what they're telling me to get. And he was like, "Oh man, I've been here. This blah blah blah." What I'm saying? So
yeah.
there's all these subgroups. I think that's really intriguing.
Oh my gosh, I did not expect the conversation to go there, but that's fascinating, as
Yeah,
you
yeah,
say a lot.
it is. It
That's
is.
fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, especially I think girl dads. There's a unique thing too, because I mean I think Kobe made that popular, but there is like actually there's just certain things that you experience that I don't think when you have boys you do, and vice versa. But yeah, intriguing. I did. Not, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go, but I tell you, I spend my time
Yeah, yeah.
interacting with things that seems like I shouldn't be able to. I'm like, wait. There we go. She's like, yes.
What the
No.
researchers were able to prove is that our capacity for empathy can grow or shrink based on how we view ourselves.
Mm,
Our sense of identity determines the extent of our empathy. And that means coming to understand that we are more than one thing. We're
oh,
not just a Manchester fan, we're soccer fans. We're not just a Republican or a Democrat. We're not just gay or straight. We're not just white or Asian or Latino. We are multiple things, all of us, all the time. And if we would understand the multiplicities of our identity, we will find more points of connection, even with people we wouldn't expect.
mm,
And I think that's exactly what happened with this young girl in Naaman's household. You see, if all she was an Israelite and all he was Syrian, they'd have no connection.
mm.
If he was just a great man and she was an enslaved girl, they would have no connection. But they did have a connection. And I think the shared identity was pain.
See,
She knew the pain of
come
being
on,
a
Bella.
captive, of losing her family, of losing her home, of being in a foreign country against her will. She knew the pain of loss. And she looked at Naaman, this great general, who was in pain, perhaps physical, but definitely social, with his leprosy. And she recognized in him, I know what that's like. I know what it is to be a person who suffers. And when she saw that his identity and her identity had a connection, it made it possible for her to care, even for her enemy. We need to recognize the people around us not just as somebody who voted for the other team, or someone who worships differently than me, or thinks differently than me, or has a different soccer club they root for. But recognize that it is possible, if we just explored one another's stories enough, to find a point of connection that you wouldn't know was there otherwise. And there, healing can begin. Think about what this girl did for Naaman. Because she shared his pain, because she extended a sense of compassion to him and said, hey, there's this prophet in Syria who can heal you, it completely changed the trajectory of Naaman's life. It transformed him, not just physically, but spiritually. If we are to have that kind of engagement as the followers of Jesus in this world, it means looking at the person that you like least and understanding that there's a point of connection by which transformation is possible.
I'm gonna tell you, that's been the key of me reconnecting with my dad.
Wow.
Because we've had such a, but what he's saying is that, like, doing that, but it's been much more valuable to me by doing that. Oh my gosh. Even though it's not easy. But oh my goodness. Yeah, this is good.
But many of us never give it a chance because we think that person has nothing in common with us. 6 months ago, I saw this kind of power up close. In
Wow.
May, with a small group of others, I went to Israel. It's not an ideal time.
No.
I did not go as a tourist. We didn't go to see the sights. We went, led by a former State Department official, to meet with people who've been affected by the war.
Oh, wow.
We met with victims of October 7th, people who lost families, horrific stories they told us. We met with hostage families, some of whom still have no idea if their loved ones are alive or dead in Gaza. And we met with Palestinians who've been affected by this war, including Palestinians in the West Bank who are facing significant persecution. And we met with Palestinian Christians and pastors. The stories were gut-wrenching, awful. The last day we were in Israel, just outside Jerusalem, we met with two men, probably in their 50s, I'd guess, maybe early 60s. One was named Rami, an Israeli Jew, and the other named Bassam, a Palestinian Muslim. Now, if that's all they were, Israeli Jew and Palestinian Muslim, they'd have no connection, no bridge of empathy. But Bassam and Rami are best friends. They profoundly love each other to the point where they are joking with each other. Bassam called Rami, he said, I love this old ugly Jew. And he meant that affectionately as a joke. The reason why they have a bond of friendship and genuine love and respect, despite their different identities, is because they do share an identity in common. They're both fathers. They're both grieving fathers. Bassam's 10-year-old daughter was killed when an Israeli soldier shot her in the back. And Rami's daughter, 14 years old, was killed when a Palestinian suicide bomber blew up her bus. Before losing their children, neither of these men knew anyone from the other community. But they were brought together through a group called the Parent Circle. The Parent Circle, I think, now has over 700 families in it, both Israeli and Palestinian, all who've lost children in the conflict over the last 20 years. And through Parent Circle, Bassam and Rami met one another and became friends. As Rami said, we share the same pain. They didn't see one another as just Jew or Muslim, Israeli or Palestinian, but they knew one another because they saw the pain a father has who's lost a child, and embraced one another and built a bridge of care and concern and empathy, which eventually built into a bridge of genuine friendship and love for one another. Bassam said to us, there is power in pain. We can use it for destruction, or we can use it for hope. If an Israeli and a Palestinian can build a connection, certainly a Democrat and a Republican can. Certainly a citizen and an immigrant can. Certainly a middle-aged white guy and a young woman of color can. Our differences do not define us unless we let them. So 3 suggestions as we wrap up. Number 1, based on that research from the UK, we can expand or shrink our empathy based on how we understand our self-identity. So, what voices are you listening to? Remember, it was the composition of those questions in the survey that made those fans believe that their primary identity was either Manchester United or a bigger identity that I'm a soccer fan. Likewise, the voices you are listening to, particularly in the media, are either going to expand your sense of identity or shrink it. Are the voices you are listening to telling you that you are just one thing? That you only have one identity, that it's just your political identity, or just your nationality, or just your ethnicity, or just your sexuality, or just your politics? Is it just one thing? And is it telling you that everyone else who doesn't share that identity is to be feared or marginalized? If you are listening to those kinds of voices, just turn them off. And open yourself to listen to the voices that are expanding your identity. That you're seeing yourself as more than one thing. And in particular, I want you to be careful of listening to so-called Christian voices, those who claim the identity of Christ, that are making you more angry and afraid. Anyone who claims to be speaking on behalf of Jesus and his gospel and is telling you to be more angry and afraid of your neighbor is not leading you by the Spirit of Jesus, but by the spirit of Antichrist.
Amen.
Because we have not been given a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and freedom and love.
Come on.
Secondly, take a chance and spend some time.
It's so funny because in Black church right now, there'll be an organ playing.
Oh yeah.
But he would be the power.
I know
Love.
Dave's watching right now too. Dave's like, he's like, all right, next time.
Yes, this is amazing.
With someone who you don't think you have anything in common with. You heard Brew earlier talking about tables out here, tables at Dave's house, tables to talk about the election aftermath. This New Song community, which I've had the pleasure of coming to over the years numerous times to speak and retreats, different things we've done together. You're remarkable in the diversity that you display, age, ethnicity, background, and that's great. But I even know in a place like this, the temptation is to just kind of congregate with or connect with people that look like you, think like you, share your demographics, your age, whatever. But you have opportunities right here to connect with people that are different. Sit down with somebody and share your story with them and listen to their story and keep asking questions until you find a point of connection. You will. There will be something that you share in common, even though you don't expect it. It might be superficial. I don't know, maybe you're both Dodgers fans. It could be something really meaningful, a shared loss or pain or grief, like Rami and Bassam. But you will find something if you put the effort in, if you are curious and courageous enough to open yourself up to those kinds of conversations. Even if you find points of strong disagreement, like you voted for different candidates, keep pushing through and find that point where you can begin to build a bridge of empathy. Finally, third, please don't believe for a moment that empathy is ever a sin. It's a growing message, including within the church, that empathy is a sin. You're going to bump into this if you haven't already,
I don't even know how that even.
and it's unholy.
I don't even know how to even. I don't even know how to. How would you even think that?
Yeah, it's interesting, but people do. I don't think they would use that language, but that's definitely it's definitely where I mean, I'm in Texas.
How, like, can you help me understand? Like, maybe I'm just, maybe I wasn't quite getting it, but
Well,
like,
yeah.
yeah, why would it, how could someone say empathy's a sin? Like, too
Well,
much empathy.
well, I think part of it's coming from the book that he mentioned that's coming out soon. So whoever is behind that, they're probably saying because that thing is that basically we become too empathetic with people to the point to where we don't
We're
feel.
not, oh, okay, I get it. Okay, okay.
So
Like,
that's
you're
not true.
like,
Hmm.
you're like, oh, you're like, dealing fentanyl to people.
Hmm.
And then you're just like, oh, yeah, I mean, you got to make a living.
Yeah, yeah.
That's like
Well,
an
they're
extreme
they're in
example.
pain. They're in
Yep.
pain. They can't get it any other way. So
Got
this
it.
must
So you're
be.
not calling people out. It's not,
Yeah.
you're not exercising tough love to
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that that's having empathy. I feel like having empathy is really understand. Like, it just that doesn't feel like empathy to me. That feels like enablement. You're just kind of enabling
Hmm.
someone. To me, empathy is like feeling what they're feeling, but also understanding the context that God has them in too.
Hmm.
Or it can't just
Yeah.
be like, I support, you could be doing something very destructive and I'm just
Hmm.
going to support you because,
Hmm.
whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I
helpful.
think we're
Thanks for,
agreeing with him. Yeah. And I
yeah, for
think
sure, for sure.
that's a good point because I think it is an uncommon thing to hear. So that is something we want to clarify. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Holy. If you think the gap between Israeli and Palestinian is wide, if you think the gap between Naaman, the great man of Syria, and an enslaved Israelite girl is wide, there is no identity gap wider
Mm.
than the gap between creator and creature.
Mm.
There is no gap wider than the one between God Almighty and us. And yet, though we were sinners, though we were enemies of God, his empathy motivated him to empty himself and take on flesh and dwell among us, to share in our pain and in our temptations, to weep with us and grieve with us, to carry our sins upon himself and die on the cross for us so that we might be reconciled to him as his children.
Mm.
Empathy is at the heart of the gospel we preach. It is never a sin.
Mm.
Because when we empathize, even with our enemy, we are reflecting the character of our Heavenly Father and the love he has shown to us. There are challenges in our country right now. Divisions, anger, fear, and they're real. I don't intend to minimize those things, but we have a calling as the people of Jesus in this moment. It is not anger. It is not vengeance. It is not isolation, navel-gazing, or self-pity. It is to build bridges of empathy, including with the people we like least, because that is what our Heavenly Father has done for us. That is your mission. That is our calling. It takes courage, it takes curiosity, and it takes the grace of God. But if we do that, I believe, just as Naaman experienced a powerful transformation because of the empathy of one young girl, what kind of transformation could we see in our communities, even in our country, if we would take up that calling again? Let me pray.
All right, Sky.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
definitely.
I don't know. The girl example is like interesting. You know, it is powerful. It's hard, I think, because it feels like people in power, right? You got people who just have the control, and then to just be like, oh yeah, like, but you can still love them, and you can still like, you could transform them, but it's like it just feels like these are the people who keep taking,
Mhm.
and then you're just like, oh, give them something that they really need.
Mm.
It is like when I think about power, right? There's sometimes I feel like there's like almost like a fear that comes
Mm.
on me, like this feeling that like, I'm powerless.
Mm.
Like that's just kind of I think it's a very natural reaction to power.
Mhm.
Is that like they've got more power than me, right?
Mm.
And I think it's hard when you realize that those people with power, they're sometimes even more afraid.
Mm.
Like they might even be more afraid. Like the fear that I'm feeling, like they're more afraid. They're afraid of something more powerful than them. They're afraid of like, you know, like losing what they have. But it's really hard to. It's like you're kind of like sometimes the people in power are creating the problems for you, right? They're
Mm.
like overwhelming you with all this stuff, but it's like they almost don't even know. They don't know what they don't know.
Mm.
And it's hard because I think you said once that some like during like George Floyd, people kept coming up to like, black people in the black community and saying like, "Oh, can you explain this to me?"
Mm.
Like, can you help me understand what's going on?
Yeah.
And it's like it's just kind of like they just don't know. So
Mhm.
I think that there is something powerful. I think it is hard
Mm.
because you're just thinking like these people already have so much, and these people are creating the oppression, sometimes for others.
Mhm. Mhm.
But then just thinking of them as being just as afraid, if not more, than you are of whatever else is out there,
Hmm.
I think is interesting. And then the second thought I had was just about like understanding, right? Like that's when it's like, what do I care about? What do I want my work to be towards? And it's like understanding, like the
Mm.
intellectual economy, or like,
Mm.
you know, whether
Hmm.
we like learn or we teach, it's
Mm.
like we're giving and taking through understanding, and
Mm.
we're filling that hunger, that curiosity we have.
Mm.
And we pay a cost to understand that people, it's hard to love things you don't understand, right? Was my one liner.
Mm.
But then you think like, you know, like my husband John was like, he was just like, Jesus went to the cross. He got accused of all these, like, we're worried about being misunderstood.
Mm.
I mean, Jesus got accused of all this stuff. And so that definitely puts it into perspective, or at least it's kind of like that feeling of like overcoming
Mm.
that like stepping down from power and really experiencing it, kind of
Mm.
ties it together. So yeah, that's kind of where
Mm.
I'm at with all this. But it's been quite a roller coaster, I think, these past few months.
It is interesting. I think what's intriguing for me is you were talking about understanding, and I'm still kind of processing things through grief and just like how I view life. One of the last things my mom said to me is, "I hope you understand." And and when she said that, it she was speaking of it was felt like the moment, and then as I was reflected on that, I think it was really about her life, a lifetime. And she didn't have the benefit of being able to have the resources we have, where like we would talk to a Dave or Sky, and then this idea of like paying your pain is your platform for power. But that was definitely, my mom had power from her pain, and even the last things that she said to me and the things she did. And but there's a muscle of exercising empathy, and I think
Mm,
you could exercise the empathetic muscle through, when you approach power from your place of pain, because then you're vulnerable. You know what I mean? If it's actually more risky to come from it from power, to try to step from power to have empathy. I think you're not going to find empathy if you're coming from power. So I think, what I love the most about what I heard is, it encourages me that he just described a very complex thing and gave a, something very digestible and simple, but it's such a complex thing. And I'm encouraged that it's because I've, we've all wrestled with these things, but the fact that he brought it something so complex and make it simple enough to implement, it's really important, because I think we need to do more. We need more of that. You know what I mean? Because I mean,
mm,
I think a lot of innovate. Because I usually I would have never even tried that, because I would think, oh my God, nobody cares about empathy.
mm, yeah,
Nobody,
yeah,
the
yeah.
people that have suffered, care about empathy.
Mm,
But guess what? Who's Everybody suffered. So,
mm.
yeah, I like that. This is really good. I mean, I knew there was something to it, if Dave was throwing it out there like that.
I know he was. He was. He texted it to me too separately. He was like, "Oh,
Yeah,
you might like this," and
yeah,
then
yeah.
it said he was sending it out. But yeah, we definitely wanted to start this up again because
Mm,
we wanted to just be around for people to
mhm,
process all the things going on around us, and so I felt like that was a good message
mhm,
to reflect on and think about.
mhm,
So yeah, it just sounded like the perfect one. Although I really want to see, I want to see your messages.
mm.
You have the links to those.
Yeah,
You do? Okay, okay.
yeah. There's some
We'll
links.
do. How long do you speak for?
I never know how long it's going to be going into it. No, it was about 40 minutes, about
Okay.
40, 40 minutes, both times about 40 minutes. So it was
Yeah,
pretty cool. It was pretty cool too, because it's like the muscle of doing that. And then I'm not used to really, I don't really speak in churches. So like
yeah,
the language, you just got to be careful, you know what I mean? So it's fun. But I really enjoyed that. And I enjoy, yeah, this has been good. I'm glad we got, because I think, the world, we need to be able to digest what's happening, because the things that are happening in these elections, are going to affect the world. And so I'm glad we got, a good message to kind of get us back into that conversation. I mean, because I mean, the Ukrainian war, like a lot things have kind of picked up, and I think it's in reaction to things. So
yeah,
it's going to be wild. It's going to be interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. It was great.
Well, thank you for joining. This is actually, this is episode 14. I think this is episode 15. Thank you for Dave throwing us out in the chat. Thanks for Sky making something extraordinarily complex and making it digestible and simple enough for us to make a decision if we want to have empathy or not. Really excited about his book coming up. Something, I don't remember the direct title, but it was like, do we really think Jesus in heaven is a real thing? You
Yeah.
remember?
Was he serious about heaven? What if
Yeah, yeah,
Jesus is
was
serious
Jesus
about
really
heaven?
serious about heaven? Which is really, really, that's very, as a Christian, it's like, man, I really want to, that really is a good one. But thank you so much for joining. We're praying for you, we're thankful for you, and we'll see you next time. And as we close out, let the church say, Amen.
Amen.
And we'll see you soon.
And I know there's always a few seconds after.
Yeah.
It's always like you're always like I'm like, oh, I'm still.
No, that was fun. I'm glad we came back, got back to it. Um, that was fascinating to me, to be honest with you. But and I know you're retired because you kind of been in it, been in the
Yeah.
game, been at the fight in the
Yeah.
fight today. But I found that interesting because um, I try to do that a lot, and I noticed I don't think a lot of people. I don't think people really. I don't think people are really looking at like how important empathy is.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean because I'm constantly, if I didn't do that I'd be so screwed. Like I'm constantly interacting with people, and I have to have the empathetic because they're not people aren't naturally empathetic.
Yeah. I think we're still on, by the way. I
Are
feel
we?
like it's still, yeah.
Oh, are we on? Are you sure?
I don't know. It looks like I'm like watching the video and it looks like we're,
Let me make sure
let me just
before
like,
I start cussing. No, I'm joking.
yeah, we are. Yeah, yeah, yeah. John
Oh,
just said we are. Yeah.
John's amazing.
Yeah.
John's like, look, I keep telling you.
Yeah. Let me let me